Okay, I'm going to shoot this video just to talk about two particular issues or elements of Spinoza's um, philosophy. And those are perfection, what is perfection, and the second is on activity and passivity. So, to understand Spinoza's definitions of love and hate, for instance, he talks about that hate or pain is the feeling of going from a greater state of perfection to a lesser state of perfection. And pleasure is going from a lesser state of perfection to a greater state of perfection. And so, understanding what Spinoza means by perfection. Now, I have in previous videos described it as feeling more powerful, feeling more full. Another way to think about perfection, and this is how Spinoza actually describes it, is when you are building a house and it's still in a state of being built, right? It's not done yet. Someone could come along and say, that's an imperfect house. And it is imperfect. It's imperfect because it's not finished, right? It's not complete. But when it's completed, then it's done, right? When the house is finished. And the word for that is perfect. Now, it isn't perfect in the sense that there's nothing ever wrong with it, right? That has no flaws. That's generally what we think of when we say the word perfect now, is something that doesn't have any flaws. But that is not what Spinoza means by the word perfect. What Spinoza means is simply that it's complete. So when you're done with the house, it's complete. And then it's perfect, right? So we might say, well, then how do you know when it's done? Because, for instance, any practical project that you undertake, say I'm going to build a house, then you know that there's always going to be something to still do. There's always some little project. The house is always falling into a state of disrepair and it needs to be fixed. There's maintenance that's always going on. So you might say, well, the house will always have something that needs to be done. Therefore, the house will always be incomplete. And so how do you know when you say that's good enough, we're going to call it done, right? Because that's when you're going to use the word perfect. You're going to say it's perfect, but just when you're done with it, not necessarily when it doesn't have any more flaws. For instance, you could imagine a painter painting a painting, and they've got the idea in their head of one kind of painting, and then they start painting and it gets really close, but they're probably in their mind it's even more perfect than what they will ever do, or better than anything they will ever do on the canvas. But at some point, the painter is going to say, okay, that's good enough. And at that point, they're done. And they're going to say, it's complete. We'll hang it up. It's done, right? The house, it's close enough to being done. We can now live in it. That's good enough. We're done. So where is that line, right? Where you're going to go from imperfect to perfect, or from it still needs work, it still needs work, it still needs work, to we're done now, right? It's perfect. And the answer to that is a more simple word for it: satisfaction. When you are satisfied, not kind of satisfied, not almost there, but when you're like, yes, that's it, then it's perfect. Then it's complete. Then it's done, right? Think of this even in terms of eating. When you have satisfied an appetite, then it's completed. It's done. You don't want the thing anymore. That's when it's satisfied, right? If you had some craving for ice cream and then you finally eat enough ice cream, now let's say you just have a little bit of ice cream and you still want more, and you're looking at other people's ice creams like, I want some more ice cream, or then it's not complete. Your appetite is not done. It's imperfect. And you have to satisfy it before it will be actually satisfied. And then once it's satisfied, you'll be like, yeah, that's complete. So we will use the word perfect for when you have achieved a level of satisfaction where desire comes to an end on that thing. Okay, and now you can see that you can use the word perfect for almost anything, right? A meal is perfect, not when it didn't have any flaws, but when it fully satisfies, right? When it fully, completely satisfies, that's when it's perfect. Spinoza does not mean by the word perfect any moral degree of satisfaction, any intellectual, any there isn't like perfect as only for things like Jesus, right, who never committed any sin and was totally flawless. That is not what Spinoza means by the word perfect. What he means is just simply total satisfaction. It's fully finished. It's complete. Now, turning now to the notions of active and passive. To be active and passive, passivity is when you are moved by something else, right? The action is done to you, and you move out of being pushed, for instance, or being moved. Activity is where you are the source of your own actions. Inadequate ideas or acting out of emotions like love and hate, pleasure and pain, these are all kinds of passivity. That is because your mood, your emotion is the cause of your activity, right? So let's say that you're really hungry. You go to the fridge and you look for something to eat, and there's fruit, there's vegetables. None of that is going to satisfy your desire is for something really calorie-laden and sweet. And so you turn to the freezer and you pull out the ice cream instead, and you eat tons of ice cream. Now, in all of those, in every moment of the being hungry to gorging on ice cream, there is a series of decisions that you're making, and you might say, I am choosing these things. But Spinoza would say, no, that's probably not the case. You are, first of all, acting on desire, and desire is the essence of man. And then you're looking to get pleasure, which is a feeling of going from a lesser to a greater state of completion or satisfaction, right? Of perfection is the word he uses, but now we understand that you want to satisfy this desire. So anything that allows you to satisfy the desire, you will call good because it's pleasing. Ice cream is really good, and you're going to eat it, right? And that satisfies, and you are acting on entirely your desire for pleasure, and it's being moved on. You are being moved on not by reason, but simply by the emotion of pleasure, right? Love. For ice cream, in this case, it's good, it's good, it's good. If you were being moved by reason, on the other hand, you would be able to make choices, or you would actually make choices on each step of the game, and you would make choices based on reasonable criteria, not just based on what you feel like doing. So when you act on just what you feel like doing, and you let that feeling kind of run the show, you are very passive. When, however, you make decisions that are reasonable, Spinoza would say this is not because you feel like it, because reason is not an emotion. And what the mind does is just try to understand. So when you act in reason, you are actually acting because you are choosing, your mind is choosing to do what is reasonable. Spinoza argues that anything that is worthwhile, anything that is valuable, anything that is truly good for you, you yourself, you would always be able to choose it based on reason and not necessarily by emotion. That emotions do not get you to do what is right any more than, well, they do get you to do what's right. Let me back that up for a minute. Spinoza argues we always act on emotions. We will never be free from them. But we can act on reason. We are always moved by our emotions, so this makes us passive, but we can act on reason or with reason, and that anything that is right to do, you could arrive at doing by reason, not by emotion. And so the trick is figuring out how to act on reason when we are also heavily emotional beings. And the answer is not, you might say, well, then I need to be like a robot that doesn't have any emotion. That's impossible. So you will never be without emotion. Emotions are fundamental to the human experience, to the human being. You cannot not live without a Befindlichkeit, without a mood. So how then does a person become active and use reason for making their decisions? And the answer is you have to practice doing what is reasonable, even when you don't want to, contrary to your emotional desire at the moment. Now, how do you practice doing what is reasonable when we are always emotional and always will be? And the answer to that is you have to replace one emotion with another. You have to replace those emotions that lead you to do unreasonable things with emotions that lead you to do reasonable things. So you can only do that by thinking it through. Not only, but you largely need to think this through before you run into the problems where your emotions start taking hold. So you need to have formulated a plan ahead of time for those times when your emotions lead you to do things that are wrong, so that you can replace those emotions that are leading you wrong with some other emotion that will help you to do what is reasonable and do what is right. So let's take the ice cream example really quickly. I'm feeling hungry. I want to eat. I go to the fridge. I see fruit and vegetables, but I really want something that's going to be big bang for the buck with calories. And I turn to the ice cream. But I have rehearsed in my mind already that I know this is going to be a temptation for me. Now, it's a temptation because it's a short-term pleasure. And it's very satisfying short-term. But long-term, it makes me hate myself more. And by hate myself, I don't mean, oh, self-loathing kind of hate, but hate as in it causes me greater pain. I feel less energetic. I feel less healthy. I have less life expectancy. I get diseases and morbidity rate increases, right? I'm more likely to die. All kinds of reasons why eating an unhealthy diet are bad for me. I'm rehearsing, right? Before I'm tempted by the drive or desire for my love of ice cream, I think through also about all of the things that are bad about the ice cream. And I try to replace my love of ice cream with something more reasonable. Now, at the moment that I really want ice cream, though, all of those thoughts about health and long-term well-being and all that, they're not going to do anything to touch my love of ice cream. I'm going to have to come up with something that's a better trick to do what is reasonable than thinking about long-term benefits and all of that. I'm going to have to give myself something more short-term to trick myself into replacing one emotion with another. And if I have an emotion for love of ice cream, that's desire, really seems like it's going to satisfy, I'm going to have to attack that emotion, the love of ice cream emotion. And why do I love ice cream? Because it tastes so good, and it's going to feel so good going down my throat, into my tummy, all of these things. It's pleasurable in every way, and it's so satisfying. All of that sweetness. So here's what I may have to do to rehearse how to deal with that. I might have to think of tricks that I can use. So what if I instead do some research when I'm not in the desire for ice cream and learn about how ice cream is made? And I learn that ice cream is, made from dairy, and it's made in bulk from dairy that is, derived from cows in bulk. And the cows, when they give their milk, they also give blood and pus into that milk. Right? Oh, blood and pus in the milk. And that blood and pus makes its way into my ice cream. And if I think about that, and I think, do I really want to eat cow blood and pus? And I imagine that blood and pus in my ice cream container at the moment that I also really want it. Look, there's two really conflicting emotions. Repulsed by blood and pus, drawn by ice cream. And the ice cream can only win if I focus on, just don't think about the blood and pus. But if I think about the blood and pus, my desire for ice cream will immediately plummet. Don't want it anymore, right? Or imagine that one of your housemates spit in your ice cream. Ew. Right? It's disgusting. Suddenly the ice cream is not so attractive anymore. My love of ice cream just plummeted. I'm going to pick something else, right? So you have to come up with tricks to get you to do what is reasonable sometimes, because you will never do what is reasonable just because it's reasonable. You will do what's reasonable when you have an emotion. So you need to spend some time figuring out what are the things that generally tempt me most, and how can I deal with them so that I choose what is reasonable rather than unreasonable at the time when I am most pulled by an emotion. And if you have a strong emotion, you have to have another equally strong emotion to fight it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And it has to deal with the same thing, right? So if you're drawn by ice cream, you have got to have some kind of hate for ice cream at the same time. If you don't, and the hate is not stronger than the love, then you will never replace your love for ice cream. It's going to be impossible to do. Now, how do you derive such an emotion of hatred of ice cream? I don't know. Right? That you got to figure that out. But if it's unreasonable, then you need to figure it out using reason. And one of the things you have to do when you use your reason is realize that emotions combat emotions. Reason does not combat emotions. So in the heat of the moment, when you're at war and your emotion is going and you really want that ice cream, all the reasoning in the world is not going to change your behavior. You have to have love of something else or hatred of the emotion that is stronger and gets you to not do that thing. All right.